Good afternoon. Oh, good. It's working. Good afternoon, distinguished guests and colleagues. Welcome to the New Development Bank event, Accelerating Adaptation Finance, Innovative Approaches to Scaling Resilience and Impact. This is Xiheng Jiang, the Director General of Strategy, Policies and Partnerships. It's an honor to moderate this event. To contribute to the broader discussions of accelerating adaptation finance and operationalizing the global goal on adaptation, this event will bring together diverse stakeholders for dynamic and solution-oriented dialogue. First of all, I'm very pleased to invite NDB Vice President and Chief Risk Officer, Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, to give the opening remarks. The floor is yours.
Distinguished speakers, honored guests, and colleagues, good afternoon. It is an honor for me to welcome you all to this NDB event. It is a privilege for NDB to gather the distinguished panelists and everyone who is present here. Together we intend to discuss and seek solutions to accelerate adaptation finance and unlock transformative resilience. As you may know, adaptation is not a new concept, but a core of human evolution. Throughout history, we have learned to adapt by changing, innovating, and reshaping ways of life to meet new challenges, including those posed by the climate. In doing so, we have survived and developed with key wisdom and strength of decision making, preserve to manage risks and create successive milestones. Now we are challenged by the new reality. Global warming is projected to overshoot 1.5 degrees centigrade, and climate tipping points are triggering cascading risks for buildings. Coral reefs, ice sheets, glacial rainforests are shifting towards irreversible decline, threatening global food, water, and ecosystem security. The hard truth requires us to elevate adaptation to the next level. As climate changes faster and more acutely, we will need to further adapt. The cost of inaction is substantial. Our 4 billion people were affected, and nearly $3 trillion in economic loss induced by climate disaster between 2000 and 2019. Estimates show that up to 132 million people could fall into extreme poverty by 2030 due to climate change impacts. Moreover, floods, storms, and heat waves are increasingly straining infrastructure, such as those related to water management systems and others. Businesses face rising costs and revenue losses from damaged assets, higher operating expenses, and supply chain disruptions. These impacts threaten to erase development progress, erode productivity, and stall growth for years ahead. Despite such strong evidence, adaptation finance is not keeping pace. According to the Climate Policy Initiative, only $46 billion went to adaptation in developing regions in 2023, far short of the $222 billion needed. Adaptation projects face well-known barriers, bankability issues, hard to measure impacts, and localized solutions that defy standard approaches. Chronic underfunding means that every crisis could erode previous gains. Yet, adaptation is a strategic investment. Every resilient road, every climate-proofed schools, every early warning system could deliver tangible economic return. The World Resource Institute finds that each dollar invested in climate adaptation yields over $10 in benefit, with average annual economic returns of 20% to 27%. In forestry and nature investment in particular, annual returns can exceed 40%. The good news is that we are witnessing local adaptation initiatives precipitate. Communities are increasingly applying traditional ecological knowledge to restore ecosystem as natural shields against floods. Local states are supporting new drought-resistant crops and efficient irrigation technologies to boost local economies. Cities are expanding with more designs of green space, ecological corridors, and sustainable drainage to address increasing urban flooding. Such initiatives could be scaled up with more adaptation finance made accessible and affordable, especially for developing countries. Against this backdrop, today's event becomes even more pertinent. By crucial climate financiers, country representatives, as well as inspirational thinkers and advisors, we intend to provide a space for candid discussion and partnership for solutions. In my view, there are three important questions. The first is, can we better understand and identify local climate risk vulnerabilities? Second is, can we invest smarter and more innovatively using the finance available to accelerate adaptation? Third, can we ensure climate adaptation finance taps more effectively into opportunities to build resilience, including those offered by green technologies? Distinguished guests and colleagues, NDB is committed to assisting countries in achieving their developmental priorities and climate ambitions. 2025 marks the 10th year of NDB's establishment. To date, the bank has approved over 122 development projects with a total of commitment of US $40 billion. During 2022 to 26, the bank has set a 40% climate finance target to help mitigate and adapt to the impact of climate change, and we are on track to deliver it. With our finance, we have conserved and water bodies, built clean drinking water supply system in drought-prone areas, and upgraded stormwater drainage to withstand flooding. We have also supported the integration of more engineering designs to build resilient roads against floods and landslides. This year at COP event, we are expecting concrete ideas and actions. We look forward to listening to you all to inspire our joint way forward. Now I request Chiang to take this forward from here on with the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ranjan, for the insights and for the questions. Now let me invite our panelists to the floor. Mr. Mikko Olikanman, Head of the Adaptation Fund, Mr. Ramesh Subramanian, Global Director for Programs and Strategy, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, CDRI, and Mr. Aguinaldo Barbieri, Director General, Americas Regional Office of New Development Bank, Ms. Luciana Moreno, Regional Director for Latin America and Caribbean in the Public Sector Operations, OPEC Fund for International Development, Dr. Jun Ma, President, Institute of Finance and Sustainability, and Chairman of Green Finance Committee of China. Please. Thank you so much, distinguished speakers, for participating in this panel discussion. It's a true privilege for us to have this panel composed of leading institution and thinkers on various aspects of adaptation. You might have noticed that yesterday, the Joint MDB Climate Action Group released an MDB technical paper entitled From Innovation to Impact to inform ongoing discussions on advancing adaptation and resilience, as well as on MDB's role of supporting these efforts. As identified in the paper, adaptation is a shared multi-actor process, and adaptation agendas are increasingly intertwined with poverty, vulnerability, and inequality. So financial institutions like MDBs, like NDB, we channel resources toward adaptation by integrating climate risk considerations into lending, investment, and insurance decisions. However, our engagement is constrained by at least three key barriers: limited data and tools to assess physical climate risks, weak regulatory and market incentives, as well as the absence of clear return on adaptation investments. These barriers are related to the question also Dr. Ranjin raised in the opening remarks. So to take advantage of this, your presence, we hope to discuss how can we jointly overcome these barriers. You have up to 5 minutes for this first round of intervention to share your institution's solutions and your visions that we need to have put in place in the future, in the next few years, to enable the scaling up of the adaptation finance. So first, so I can pass on this microphone to this panelist.
Thank you so much, Shri Heng. Thanks for the opportunity. First, let me share a few data points and then a couple of points in terms of what we can do. Obviously, speaking to the MDB audience or other institutions, international financial institutions, this is, obviously adaptation finance, resilience financing is in your core, is in your DNA. The work done by CDRI, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, shows that every year developing countries, low-income countries need about $400 billion in DRI or disaster resilient infrastructure financing. Now, coincidentally, there is another 400 billion, that is 400 billion in terms of annual average losses every year that countries, low-income countries suffer to disasters. And if you look at Latin America, the figure would be probably about 15% or so. Africa is a big number. South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Ring of Fire is actually quite high. So that means we need to invest at least about $300 to $400 billion a year just to make infrastructure resilient to disasters. Now, overall resilience needs are much higher if you're going beyond disasters. But at the same time, the good news is that some of the work based on risk modeling that CDRI has done also shows clearly that there are significant returns to these investments. And these returns can be as high as 7 to 12 times. So depending on sectors, depending on geographic conditions, asset patterns, probabilistic risk assessments, and so on. So that's massive. If the world is, if you assume that the world is investing $300 billion, which it is not, but if it is investing, you're looking at 7 times minimum, $2.1 trillion in terms of returns coming in. Obviously, some of these numbers may seem very high, but the modeling work that we have done, it consistently bears out the 7 to 12 times figure. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, what do we need to do? First is obviously investing in technical resilience does reduce financial risk. So at CDRI, there are many risks that private sector is worried about if you're mobilizing private capital. Now, resilience risk, particularly when it comes to disaster resilience, is very critical because if you don't invest, obviously they're going to lose. There are many, many cases. What, for example, Nepal has seen in the recent past, many countries in Africa, for example, where the annual average losses are mounting, unfortunately, because of the disasters. So investing in technical resilience, there has to be a kind of a shift in thinking that it does reduce financial risk. Now, what this means is the financial systems also need to start valuing investing in resilience. We had a panel earlier today where if you're looking at some aspects of financial system, insurance, for example, the system is still not valuing. If you look at developing countries, less than 6% of the assets are insured. So how do we really achieve that shift in moving towards financial system valuing resilience? Now, in order for both of these things to happen, technical to financial and then financial systems embedding resilience, there are significant gaps in data. Data in terms of there is data, but there is inadequate data. Particularly when we are looking at resilience to disasters, you need long time periods of data. In the same panel that I mentioned, somebody prominent in the insurance industry mentioned that the insurance industry doesn't really care about future risk. They're looking at what probabilistic assessments show and where can they move ahead. And then finally, achieving all of these things and embedding resilience effectively into technical, financial, and all the other functions needs systemic governance reforms enabled by policy, institutional, legal, regulatory reforms, which is going to be very, very critical. I've been saying in CDRI that when it comes to ESG, environmental, social governance, if we include gender dimensions, the world has really come a long way if you look back in the last 20 years, but resilience does not get the same level of attention. So in a way, how can we have resilience kind of invoking fear of God is going to be very, very critical given the repeated, the very high frequency and increasing frequency and intensity of disasters. Let me leave it there, Shahang, but I'll be happy to respond to anything later.
Should I? Yeah. Well, thank you very much for having me. I've been working on green finance for 10 plus years, initially as a chief economist at Chinese Central Bank, working on the Chinese green financial policy. And as of now, China has the largest green lending market, amounting to about $6 trillion in terms of outstanding balance. Now, throughout the 10 years, I think the mitigation part is a massive proportion of a total green finance, about 70%. And the rest, 30% is about largely environmental, pollution control. And adaptation is a very, very small, very tiny portion. Globally, the same thing. Despite the fact that we keep talking about adaptation needs 1 trillion here, 1 trillion there, finance is not getting there. Now, the reason is not on the finance side. It's not the finance people working not hard enough, right? The central bank, all the guys are very smart. But it's a project design. That's the problem. The project design in a way that it's not making money, right? It only has investment, has no return, has no revenue, and no profits. How can you act private sector funding unless it's entirely government funded? And the government has no money too in most of the countries. That's why it doesn't go there. So my point is that the improved bankability of adaptation projects is a key, is a fundamental part, which the banks have to look into. The bankers should know the technology, should hire the right people to design a project so that these projects can pay for themselves. Now, how do we do that? For example, we have a lot of water-related problems, heavy rains and flooding and all of these, right? These are adaptation projects. You don't need to do a separate adaptation project, right, for the drainage system. You do it together with water supply, with treatment, and with a little bit of drainage. Then it resolve the issue of water supply, treatment of water, at the same time resolving the resilience problem. And how do you finance it? Because water, you can be sold, right? And you're just selling the water at a slightly higher price, and the project is financed. The second example is that all the buildings, we need a resilience part of that, right? The building has to be resistant in terms of windows and rooftops against typhoon. And how do we do that? We're building the design of the buildings. And the building can then sell for 10% higher in terms of pricing or rental. And it pays for the adaptation part, right? It doesn't have to be a separate budget for the adaptation projects. Roads and bridges, the same thing, right? You put a base higher, a couple of meters, then floods doesn't destroy you. And of course, it's more expensive, for the road traffic and the railway traffic. But you put in the pricing. Whether it's a toll road, you charge a toll, or it's a railway, you charge a tickets, which is X% higher. So that's how project design should be done to make these, adaptation projects bankable. And the other big thing is that in design of a whatever infrastructure or urban, city, you need to start with the design with adaptation rather than fixing the problem after you see it's not resilience. Now, one interesting story is this sponge city concept. Everybody knows, right? It's very popular in the last few decades, making sure the city is resistant to the flooding, heavy rains, and so on. In fact, 2,500 years ago, a Chinese city is built on the sponge city concept. 2,500 years ago. How do they do that? The city, with the city center that's 3 meters higher than the 4 corners. Each of the corner is a little lake. So when there's heavy rain, the rain goes to the lake. Yeah. So it doesn't need a sewage system, and it's a sponge city. So if you can design a city like that, it's already resilient. Yeah. The cost is much lower than a flat city, and you need to fix them with all the sewage.
Okay. Thank you, Shihane, for inviting me. I'm Aguinaldo, responsible for NDB in Brazil. I talk about a little bit about NDB. We are the newer bank, the development in the world. It's because of our name new. For now, new continue valid because there is no other newer than us. But the new development bank, NDB, was created in 2015, 10 years ago, with the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The idea is to mobilize the resources for infrastructure and sustainable development projects in emerging countries. The bank's shareholders now include additional funders, BRICS, Bangladesh, Emirates, Egypt, and Algeria. What makes the NDB unique in the principle of equality among members? So every founding country has the same voting power and the capital share, and the bank is strong identity as a bank of the Global South to Global South. Our President Dilma Rousseff always says the difference of NDB of other MDBs in the world is NDB was created by South, Global South, for Global South is our difference. So our mission is to finance sustainable, inclusive, and resilient development to complement, not compete with the other multilateral institutions. Otherwise, we look in other multilateral banks, partners to promote projects together. In essence, NDB represents a new model of partnership, one where emerging economies join forces to funding their own development priorities. Though I think it's possible to talk more in the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. My name is Luisela Moreno. I'm the Regional Director for Latin America and Caribbean for the OPEC Fund for International Development. And please allow me to use a bit of what you already mentioned, because you mentioned that adaptation is at the core of MDBs, and actually it's totally true. So I'm going to start from there. Although adaptation is part of our core activities, it's also true that multilateral, we have to adapt and change the way that we have been working and financing projects. Basically, what we were doing before at the OPEC Fund, it was project by project based, but now we realize as well that we need to look into the problems in a more holistic way. And because of that, and talking to adaptation properly, is that we have launched different initiatives to cover several items or topics that we would like to support. For example, the island, the SEED facility, the Island Resilience Facility, which is basically embedded to support the small states, SEEDs, in having ideas of projects and to convert that ideas into really tangible, bankable projects. So how we're doing that? Basically, one of the things is providing technical support, and that's what you mentioned about project preparation. So that's what I said. I'm gonna leverage on what you indicated. So one of the issues that we have realized is that countries, first, they don't have the resources for preparing the projects. And then if the projects are not properly prepared, they cannot be actually implemented. So through the SEEDS initiative, basically we are proposing, so here we have now, I see issues. Through the SEEDS initiative, basically we are supporting the countries to better develop the projects, to better prepare the projects, and to make them tangible and feasible, including climate resilience components, so that they can be sustainable across the time. For no one is a secret that the SEEDS are the region that have, or the countries and the small island states that face significant climate problems, that some of them could even disappear in a number of years. So through this type of initiative, what we're trying is to pool and leverage of our knowledge, capacities, and financial resources to make this project tangible. A second initiative that we have also taken at the OPEC Fund is the Food Security Action Plan. And with that, we have partnered with the World Food Programs to support as well projects in the agri space and to make this adaptable and with adaptation features. And third, but not last, also to give the benefit of time to my colleagues, the Green Blue Oceans. So basically combining land with water and biodiversity and ecosystem. How do we translate that? So I'm going to mention several things. Water scarcity is a huge problem, and sanitation is a huge problem in a number of our countries. So at the OPEC Fund, we are constantly financing drainage system, water providers. We are one of the largest financiers, for example, in the Maldives for water treatment. We are also quite active in this region in Argentina and water. So these are encompassed under this initiative. So as a final remark, the OPEC Fund remains committed to try to identify additional solutions to partner with fellows NDBs like the ones that are present here, and as well to mobilize private capital as well to the beneficiary countries. So basically the 125 countries that are benefiting from the OPEC Fund finance. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. My name is Rob Crush. I'm not Mikko Olakainen. He's the head of the fund, and unfortunately he had a family emergency and had to leave COP, so I'm standing in for him today. So thank you for having me in his place on this panel. I wanted to just also say a few words about the Adaptation Fund. We are one of the 4 or 5 climate funds that serve the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. We've been in existence for about 18 years. We are sovereignly capitalized and disperse our funds through fiscal agents that we call implementing entities. Just to pick up on a point that was made, for us, local adaptation is essential for building resilience where climate impacts are felt most directly, which is at the community level. Financing these efforts presents distinct challenges as solutions must be tailored to diverse local contexts. For us, local adaptation requires flexible funding that can respond to site-specific needs and priorities. Fragmented governance, limited technical capacity, barriers to accessing international finance often impede the flow of financing and top-down approaches to those who need the financing the most, which is often at the community level. Our operating model uses about 67 implementing entities, 39 of which are national or subnational entities, who we empower to develop and implement adaptation projects. These projects are locally led, designed, and ensure that community priorities and needs are reflected. Local knowledge is tapped into and harnessed. And we pair that with innovation windows that allow us to pilot creative solutions that are tailored to unique challenges. Through these modalities, we've delivered measurable results. Over 65 million people have benefited from increased resilience. About 1 million hectares have been protected, and we put in place over 600 early warning systems in over 100 countries. Most importantly, local institutions are empowered and have growing capacity to sustain adaptation gains. If I'm perfectly honest, one of the limits to our model is that it's hard to scale us. when you direct funding down to the local community level like this. So we take scaling quite seriously. We've been working with some of the other climate funds to explore ways to scale our financing, to see more resources flow down to community level, to unlock even greater innovation. For us, I think scaling is the next big story among the climate funds. And if I were to make an appeal to pick up some of the words of urgency in the opening remarks, I would also echo the call for greater financing flows to adaptation, and that those resources would be used in more innovative ways. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your insights. And now let's dive deeper into a few aspects you talked about. So for financiers like NDB and OPEC Fund, so we constantly interact with countries, governments, and subnational governments on their needs for adaptation financing and also for the challenges. And so for Barbieri, maybe you can introduce that, because for NDB, we work with the national governments and with the development banks on large-scale infrastructure projects. And we have this discussion with governments project by project. So I think in this way, how can we translate their adaptation needs into bankable projects, like in sectors of our key area of operation, like transport, water, infrastructure, and digital ones? How to turn those considerations into the projects that can make them both bankable and that resilient. Thank you. Yeah.
Shiheng, as I said, NDB is a new bank. So for us, it's very important a partnership with the other banks. I see here in the stage great opportunity to make a partner. We are new, we are learning with the others. In Brazil, as an example, we have a lot of partners like BNDES, BRDE is a South Bank. Banco do Brasil is the biggest commercial bank in Brazil. BNB, Banco do Nordeste. Why? Because this bank know more than us about Brazil, about the necessity of Brazil, about the needs of Brazil. Then a lot of situations we prefer to transfer funding to BNDES and then believe, of course, follow as well, but believe that they have more experience in Brazil than us. So this partner is a great opportunity to learning with them. Another thing is about the capacity. NDB in Brazil has only 10 people working. BNDES is 1,000 people. Then, when we intend to spread to financing small business, is very important, this kind of the partnership for us. Sometimes one example speaks louder than 1,000 words. I will share with you one example in Pará States, here in the Amazon. Here, we are working alongside the Development Bank of Latin America, CAF, the guys that is talking a little bit loud. The CAF is our partner and government of Pará in a large-scale investment program, 125 million, focus on sustainable infrastructure and climate adaptation. This initiative aims to strengthen local resilience in areas most exposed to heavy rainfall and climate stress, while improving connectivity, waste management, and the livelihoods of communities in the Amazon basin. The project intervenes directly in 14 municipalities, with combined population estimated in 700,000 people. Then I will share with you one experience. Our independent evaluation, IO, made the midterm evaluation about the implementation of the project. In some cities, small cities in the countryside of the Pará states, there is no one street paving. It's only landing, no paving. Then part of the project was to implement one street of the paving. Then, of course, the idea was to provide resilience in climate, to avoid flood, this kind of the intention when we designed the project. For our surprise, when we interview the residents there, the mothers said, "Oh, now it's possible to my son, my daughter are using the uniform of the school, the white uniform, the white shoes. They never used it before." And then the absence of the schools reduced a lot. Why? Because they are using white shoes? No, because the problems with the health of the children's was better than before, because the breath problems with the earth in the air cause absence of the students. So for us, is a big surprise, the collateral situations in this project. We are harvesting a lot of feedbacks of this project and learning more about it. Another collateral was the people make a construction of the walls in the houses. They refund the houses. This project changed the life of the people in the countryside of the Pará states. It's only one example. I will pass for my friend.
Well, thank you so much, Aguinaldo, for showcasing how will a effective partnership work and how the local knowledge is important. I believe that NDB, in our growth, we will integrate more partnerships that can be fit for purpose and can generate more benefits for our local communities. And then for OPEC Fund, you mentioned that you have developed programs in addition to projects. So what's the value and for you to see how this kind of program approach that can be differ from the traditional project approach? And what kind of strengths or what kind of context that is fit for? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I want to mention as well about the partnership because I think it's important now that we are here. So on the first one, the project approach versus the pooling approach, it helps us to have a more coherent approach with the countries. So when we have initiative where we can back certain topics, climate change, adaptation, islands resilience, or food security, we can have a more coherent dialogue with the government. So that's helped us to have a more coherent dialogue. But at the end of the day, the needs come directly from the countries. So basically, we are also now doing as well country partnership with the countries. So basically sitting with them, saying these are the initiatives that we have. What are your needs? Where do you see the development plan of the country in 5 years, in 10 years? So they give us the raw material for saying these are the plans that we want for the country. This is where you can support us. And it allows as well us to better plan. And then that links to partnerships. None of us can do anything on its own. So NDB cannot finance all the financing needs of Brazil. We cannot do it on our own either, not here, not in any other regions. So for the OPEC fund, partnership is really key, is core, and I'm seeing around people walking who are partners. Basically, we leverage a lot on partnership with the World Bank, with Asian Development Bank, with Fonplata, with CAF, with NDB. We would love to work here. So what you said is music to my ears, and that's important. But because each of us have common goals, but at the same time different approaches. So we need to work more on coherence, on harmonization, on how to see how we reduce the burden for the countries as well. So metrics that can be harmonized among us. And that's a work that it has been for a long time, but it still has a lot of gaps that we need to reduce. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for stressing partnerships again, and we look forward to strengthen that partnership at the country level and also on kind of sectors, in different sectors that you have the expertise and we have built up that expertise. So then for Adaptation Fund, that you mentioned that they have supported a lot of adaptation initiatives. So we all understand that the predictable concessional finance is a cornerstone for the efforts to scale up adaptation, particularly in countries with limited space for their financial and fiscal inputs. But however, the resources are limited in the end. So in your practice, what do you see as the most effective instruments or tools or approach that can achieve a catalytic impact for the limited resources?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. So I was actually going to start in the same place that you did in your question. We still think that there is a role for grant-based financing for some of the poorest countries, and still think that as a fund, this is our primary value add to financing adaptation. There are advantages also to being a pooled fund in the sense that we can aggregate sources of funding from different sources. We can spread risk. We can. There's an equity element in this in that approach. But that said, it is still limited, and I think I alluded to this earlier that our model can be very dollar in, dollar out, and that's not very efficient. And so for us, I think the space that we need to move more into, that we need to explore more, is how we can combine our financing with other forms of financing from other funders. I mentioned that we work through implementing entities. We work through national and subnational entities, but we also work through MDBs and also through regional development banks and UN agencies. And because we work through implementing entities like MDBs or the regional development banks, there are opportunities for those partners to add their own resources to a particular project, take a more programmatic approach, scale some of the financing, and use our money to catalyze or even possibly de-risk projects. I think the other opportunity is if you have an implementing entity that can be a shared implementing entity between a number of funders, that entity can be a sort of platform to blend financing and possibly work not just on a country basis, but on a regional basis for adaptation problems that cross borders. So I think for us, that is probably the challenge and the direction that we most need to explore without losing the advantages of being a pooled fund.
Well, thank you so much for this kind of country partnership and kind of a country platform that we can work together to achieve synergies of different sources from all different stakeholders. We look forward to the discussion in the future on that. And then for Dr. Ma, just now you mentioned that the bankability is the core of this design of the projects. But then how can make this real incentives for the financiers to do that? Because we need some maybe a broader systemic recognition of this effort. So you have done a lot of policy level regulatory analysis on these conditions. So do we need to have that in place first before we can make some project design more innovative or more forward-looking in the future design of the projects?
Yeah, I think bankability has to do with many factors. At the project design level, which is fundamental. If a poorly designed project is completely not bankable, which means that the project has no revenue, zero revenue to start with. There's nothing you can do really about in terms of policy incentive and so on. You cannot make a project with zero revenue a bankable project by subsidizing the projects or by lowering interest rate and so on, right? So the project design should be done in a way that's making the project at least marginally bankable, which means that the project delivering a return of maybe 3%, while the investor is looking for 4%. So this is what I call marginally bankable. How do we get from zero revenue to marginal bankable? It's project design. Yeah. So that's how important it is. Now, if the project is only 2 or 3% lower in terms of return compared with the investor expectation, then the policy comes in, right? The government can do for example, in the Chinese way, which is called relending facility from central bank. Central bank offers a funding facility which is 1 percentage point cheaper than the market. Or another government agency, in the China case, a lot of local governments can offer interest subsidies, 50 basis points, subsidizing project. You're making these projects from marginal bankable to bankable. And of course, we can be innovative on additional revenue. For example, the project may have created a carbon reduction that can be used to generate carbon credit. That can enhance the bankability a little bit as well, but not massively, right? It's typically equivalent to 1 or 2 percentage points of interest subsidy. And the other way is looking for new source of funding, which is cheaper than the current possible options. For example, for Brazil projects, I think you should tap into Chinese panda bond market, right? The Chinese funding is now 200 basis points cheaper in terms of policy rates compared with the US dollar. If you use a panda bond market or Ding Seng bond market to raise money, even after hedging, it could be 50 basis points, 70 basis points lower than alternative financing source. So these are all additional way of reducing funding costs and making a marginal bankable projects bankable.
Thank you so much for emphasizing some subtleties of the marginal bankable and the bankable. So it's always kind of people always tend to mix them up to say, oh, it's not bankable because there's no policy right policy framework. But actually, I think we need to combine both and to understand the subtlety is embedded in the detailed technical analysis. And so for CDRI, I hope you also mentioned that the good news about some practices and some instruments, but maybe a common concern is because in the past we have data that accumulated in history, but now the risks of the disasters and natural hazards, they are happening in an unprecedented speed with unprecedented impacts. So how can this kind of turning the data in the past maybe not working as well in the future? So this kind of fastly changing context of risks, how can we respond better with the data analysis, with tools that can help the financiers to make informed decisions in their consideration of adaptation? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shiheng. On the first point I will mention is effective design. I will weave in what Dr. Marjun mentioned. There is a lot of money, but the money is not coming in because you're not having projects that are bankable. If they're marginally bankable, how do you make them bankable, like going sequentially? Now, a key part of that is how do we bring in disaster resilience risks into consideration? So, which is where data, particularly contextualized data and modeling, becomes very important. For example, flood risks in South Asia may be quite different in terms of impact they have versus in Africa versus in Latin America. So the contextual situation needs to be understood through effective modeling. And in terms of project design, even without bringing in disaster resilience considerations, sound project design is very critical. But when you are incorporating disaster resilience, it's very critical that you do it from the beginning. It cannot be halfway through. What we've seen is that projects where you're bringing in disaster resilience considerations, even after just the first two steps, for example, in project design, they're not really effective, because particularly investing in resilience, our analysis shows that it needs only about between 5 to 15% of a project investment cost. But in highly fiscally constrained environments, countries are very reluctant if you take decisions to them at a later stage. So I think that first point, that what Dr. Majan mentioned on effective design leading to bankability, is very critical. Second is, how do we use risk data and what we are learning from data in terms of resilience? We need to have ways of measuring. There are standards such as the fast infra standards or the blue dot. You have the ISSB has been emerging as a significant partner. How do we make sure that the standards these global bodies have incorporate effectively resilience dimensions? So we are now working at CDRI. We are working with all of them, BDN, fast infra, and so on. And particularly, how does the financial sector value what is coming out of these application of the resilience standards is also very critical. So design, second is measurement, and the third is effectively doing. So how do we integrate resilience considerations in every step of the project cycle, from identification to planning to design to appraisal to execution, and then kind of, the full cycle continuing? It cannot be a halfway house. It cannot be a half-hearted solution. It needs to be a kind of full-blown solutions. At the same time, again, the good news is, yes, it is going to cost money, but it's not a whole lot. It's going to be about 5 to 15%. But obviously, given the fiscal constraints, given the resource constraints, you do need to make a strong case. But so once you do that, you do have these resilience dividends kicking in, which needs to be kept in mind.
Thank you so much for explaining the full process, that how can we try to involve the government from the very beginning of the design of this. I think that we have all the governments in face of this increased impact from natural hazards and from the climate impacts. All governments have raised their awareness, and the community have raised their awareness of include adaptation design at the very beginning. But how can we? I mean, we are different stakeholders in this process. So can you give your last message on how can we work together? If you have some specific initiative for us to build up this partnership, as we all emphasize, the partnership is key. So how can we have some things to start to really achieve synergy among us, to help the government and to help the community to work on that? So we have 4 minutes, so maybe every one of you can give a 1 minute response on that. Thank you.
Well, role of community is very critical. I'll say that flood risks account for the biggest chunk in terms of the risks across all the hazards. And the moment you talk about flood, whether it's in rural or urban areas, the role of communities becomes very important. Here I want to cite what OPEC Fund has been working on, including in partnership with the Asian Development Bank. How do we make sure that not all solutions we put in place are concrete engineering solutions? Nature-based solutions are going to be very, very critical. And financing for nature-based solutions becomes very critical. So if communities are not there, if you don't have advocacy and awareness at the community level, then these risks are going to continue. So totally agree with you.
I think a very low cost but highly effective way of doing adaptation is the early warning system for natural disaster. It's a very small investment, but it can be used by insurance company to warn the insurers, the company that's insured, that the natural disaster is coming. For example, PICC, with the Chinese insurance company, has offered a lot of these CAT insurance, catastrophe insurance, to agriculture producers, to building owners, and to everybody. And then they did this early warning system, which is rely on the models and weather information. They tell the users of insurance before time the typhoon is coming, and the flood is coming, the heavy rain is coming, and you evacuate your stuff, people and equipment and so on. That's avoiding massive losses. Yeah, it's a very small investment in terms of technology and data, but it does achieve the half of the goal of resilience.
Shiheng, thank you again. My last words is NDB is present in all country members with the office. In Brazil, we have 2 offices, São Paulo and Brasilia. We are totally open to receive projects from private sector and the sovereign and subnationals. And the more than is, we are open to make a partner with the other MDBs or institutions like this stage. Okay, thank you so much again.
Thank you. There is no an easy response for that because each of us are different stakeholders and focus on different areas. But as a final message, we need to ensure that we have continuous communication, coordination among us, including local governments, because at the end, they are the ones that have the needs. We have the financing tools, and there are others that have as well the technologies. So continuous communication among the different stakeholders is quite important to align with the country needs. And then from the OPEC fund side, we have, as I mentioned before, different approaches. So we provide concessional funding, we provide technical assistance to support the countries, and then we try to mobilize as well and co-finance with partners to make it feasible, the projects. And as well on the bankability, the adaptation and the long-term of climate sometimes cannot be measured. So we need to be innovative on how we are going to measure the return of this type of projects, which are not only income basis, that there is something that goes beyond that, that is the livelihood of all of us in the future. Thank you.
Okay, very quick last word. I think adaptation and loss and damage inhabit a shared space of resilience. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had with providers of insurance, both in terms of building concrete adaptation projects in the more upstream way and rebuilding after a disaster with loss and damage funding to build resilience into what's being built back. And to invite insurance companies into this to see if there can be a conversation about how to use this financing to lower the risks of insurability and open up markets for insurance companies to come in at not just national, but even regional and community levels. I say this from conversations I've had with colleagues in insurance companies who said that they would like to bring their products to market, but the risk premium keeps going up because of the effects of climate change. And so there's a role for our financing, I think, to create markets for insurance companies.
Well, thank you all for the messages, for the interventions and contribution. So I would like to reaffirm, as my colleague Babiari said, that from NDB, we are committed to mobilizing resources for infrastructure and sustainable development. And we are committed to innovative approaches with partners, and this is first time for NDB to organize an event on adaptation, but we just try to choose the right partner for our future collaboration. So our partnership team, Chief Paratosh is also here. Yuan, she's a core member on the adaptation research and instruments that we are going to develop in NDB. So we hope that we will follow up and we can develop something concrete in the future. So again, I would like to invite the audience to thank all two of our speakers for such a interactive and dynamic and thought-provoking discussion. Thank you all.